and welcome to 80s TV Ladies, part of the Weirding Way Media Network. I'm your producer, Melissa Roth, and here are your hosts, Sharon Johnson and Susan Lambert-Haddam.
Why, hello there. I'm Susan.
And I'm Sharon. Today we are looking at an unexpected television show for us because until just a few months ago, when we were doing some research, neither Susan nor I realized this sitcom ever existed.
That's right. At least I didn't. Who knew the massive comedy hit feature film 9 to 5, which also features the even more famous 9 to 5 Dolly Parton hit song written for that film, also spawned a sitcom. Yes, today we will be talking about the 9 to 5 television series.
And our special guest is fellow pop culture podcaster and a huge friend of the pod, Chris Stachiw.
Chris is the creator and podcaster of the Kulturecast and several other television, movie, and supernatural podcasts. He is co-owner, along with Mike White of the Projection Booth, of Weirding Way Media. From the get-go, Chris has been a huge supporter and advisor to me and to our show.
We'll be talking about Chris and his podcast, as well as the 9 to 5 TV show and movie, and Jane Fonda's producing career.
Welcome to 80s TV Ladies, Chris Stachiw.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It is such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
I'm excited to be here. For the most part, I feel like it's weird because this is based off of a movie. Things that are based off of movies tend to have kind of a weird aura of energy around them, especially things where like everybody is recast. So it's an interesting situation with this show, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Me too. And we're recording some crossover shows with you, which we think will be super fun. We're like doing what they did in the 80s with like Simon and Simon and Magnum PI. And we're going to hope that it'll be super fun for our listeners on both podcasts.
Yeah, we're going to be covering, the movie that this show talks about, and then China Syndrome, All of Me, and then clearly the best of the three left for last, the best little whorehouse in Texas. The pièce de résistance of the four. Clearly leaving it for the end for a reason, yeah.
Always important to save the best for last.
Sure, yeah. Best is an interesting term.
All right, before we get into 9 to 5, let's talk for a moment about you.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you're zooming in from now.
So I'm originally was born in San Francisco, but I grew up in North Texas, and now I live in the Midwest in the great city of Lincoln in the state of Nebraska. And this is what I do for a living, is podcasting. And y'all are part of y'all. Yes, give away where I was raised.
Yeah.
Y'all are part of the Weirding Way Network, which is what I do for a living, running, managing, and then creating more content than I know what to do with over there at Weirding Way Media, where you can find this show and so many other shows, including, like Susan mentioned, the show where we have a crossover episode coming up with the three of us. And then Susan, you and I did an episode with Richard where we talked about China Syndrome, and then couple other just kind of random episodes, kind of just touching more on the careers of the women in the film that this show we're going to be talking about is based on. So that's what I do. I just sit and I run my mouth all day.
Sounds like fun. Sounds like fun.
It's a good gig.
All right. Tell us a little bit about your podcast, the Kulturecast, how that happened.
How did it happen? Well, one evening I was watching a movie, as I tend to do on the weekends, and a friend of mine reached out to me and was like, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast?" And I had, here's some information. 8 years ago, I had no podcast background or knowledge or anything. And so I was relying on someone else to edit my show. And then that person became immensely unreliable, and I had to learn how to edit a show pretty much on the fly. It ended up being like a 9-hour episode about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies, all of them. And we had a whole bunch of interviews. It was not the best time to start kind of the movie podcast of your dreams, but that's kind of the day I started the show myself. And so the Kulturecast has been running now since October of 2014. And so that would put it at 9 years this fall. And then in doing the show, I've met a whole lot of other people, including the Projection Booth's Mike White, which is the kind of more educational version of my show, or I like to call my show the totally less serious version of his show, because his show is very much edutainment, a docu audio series about films that goes way more in depth than most people should, but it's really received by the audience that it's found. And so I found Mike. We work on all kinds of things together, like, a lot of 70s TV show podcasts about shows that I definitely didn't grow up on, like Barney Miller and Columbo and things people my age normally aren't watching. I feel like maybe I'm wrong in that regard, but I kind of have just built a body of work of talking about movies and TV. And then in 2020, when the pandemic hit, we kind of transitioned into a paranormal, supernatural, true crime podcast. And then that arm kind of has extended out in its own interesting direction. But I don't know, podcasting is never something I thought I would do, but I guess it just kind of makes sense in a way the more I think about it. And I'm glad that I kind of have found the thing that I like to do by accident, because most people never find it at all. So that's my story. No one's ever asked me. This is like the first time. I just want to point this out. I don't go on other people's shows and talk about myself. I am extremely uncomfortable right now talking about myself.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's not a bad thing. I just don't do it. Like, nobody ever asks. Not that I'm saying like, please ask about my life, but it's like, I've never been put on the spot like that. So thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. We're happy to have you on. We're happy to talk to you about this. And you know, you've been a big friend of the pod, as it were.
I didn't mention how you and I met, but we met sideways through the elephant who's not in the room, Mr. Richard Haddam. He who talks more than maybe even I do, one might say. I don't know.
I don't know how your episodes together are less than 4 hours.
How they ever end. Richard, we have to stop now. What? I want to keep talking. But that's how Susan and I met, was through Richard reaching out to Mike and I when we started the first. Actually, it's kind of funny because Mike and we kind of became much closer friends by starting the Kolchak podcast. And that's how Richard met us. And then we ended up being on, speaking of television show from the 70s, we ended up being on the re-release of Kolchak a couple of years ago. We were on the Blu-ray, which was mind-blowing in a way. But if we're sitting here tooting our own horn a little bit, I'm gonna get a little toot in for that, because that's the thing that I can't believe. If you're asking me about like all the things I've done and like where I am at, like I know you're not, but just like getting to this point, just thinking about it, like I'm just glad to be here to be able to talk.
That's so cool. And this episode that we're doing now started because I was suggesting cool female-driven 80s movies for you to watch and maybe cover on your show. And the 9 to 5 film came up, and you invited us on your show to talk about the movie with you.
And I liked it a lot. It was really fun.
Had you heard of it before and not seen it, or was it completely new to you?
I don't know. Like I had heard, look, everybody's heard the song. I think we said as much on the episode, like everybody's heard the song, I think at this point. So, I mean, look, anymore, like I feel like I don't get to watch things I really want. I watch things I need to watch. And if those things tend to intersect, awesome. If not, I will just watch whatever I need to watch and I won't get to watch what I want. It's fine. It's part of doing this, which is not that big of a deal. So ultimately, there's like a lot of people, there's a list of things I would like to watch. And this was on a very long, ever-growing list of things to watch. So long answer to a short question.
And in doing the research on that movie, we discovered there's a television show, which I didn't know. Did you know?
I don't think so. I must have known about it at some point and then quickly forgot about it. Because at the time that the first season aired, I would have known what was coming on all 3 networks, because at the time there were only 3. But it was clearly not something that I watched or that stuck in my brain. So I must have just completely forgotten about it.
So the movie's on a TV show that had 2 seasons on ABC and 3 seasons in first-run syndication. It ran for 85 episodes, and I don't remember there being a TV show, which is, as Sharon says, a little bit unusual for us here at 80s TV Ladies.
Yes.
I think I had heard of the TV show in one of those like listicles online where it's like TV shows based on movies you didn't know existed. Because I knew that there was a TV show that had Dolly Parton's sister playing her character. Obviously, she's not billed as, Rachel Parton. She's billed as Rachel Dennison, but that was like the big thing in that article was, oh, there's a 9 to 5 TV show where the character who Dolly Parton plays is played by her sister in the show. I think what's weird is like knowing that, again, had never seen it. And to be fair, trying to see it seems like a problem in and of itself. My God, again, television show from the 80s shouldn't be this hard to find, yet it is impossible to find, frankly.
Yes. Now, let me ask you, I don't want to age you, but were you alive in the 80s? Are you an 80s TV babies and 90s TV babies?
At what point in one's life would one say they were able to remember TV? When they were like 5 or 6?
I'm just
that
saying,
would make me 90s TV baby.
Okay. All right.
That's kind of what I'm getting. I mean, I've seen probably more television from the 70s and 80s now than I have from the 90s. Because my point of reference for 90s TV is like literally more or less the X-Files. And I wasn't watching a lot of the big 90s shows. I haven't seen a lot of the big 90s shows. So, again, that's why I ask, like, where is this line? Because, again, like, I probably watched more 2000s TV. Like, one of the first shows I remember watching was Supernatural, and that was like 2006. So, I mean, again, I watched a lot of I Love Lucy growing up because my mom loves I Love Lucy. So,
well, who doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, for real, who doesn't? So, I mean, if we're talking like that kind of television, I grew up more around older television and The Simpsons in the 90s. So I'm a 90s TV baby, but I didn't really start having my own autonomy of TV shows until the mid 2000s.
All right. Fair enough. Okay. Well, so as we talk on the episode we did with you, the movie actually was really a movie about a movement.
Right.
And the whole thing started around a labor movement, literally called the 9 to 5 movement, the seeds of which were in the civil rights, human rights, and labor rights movements of the 60s and 70s, and then amplified because the number of women and women of color moving into the workplace, especially into office jobs, was rising very quickly. And I sort of just want to place us a little bit for you and our listeners who weren't around in, say, 1980, kind of place us in that spot. Lots of huge advancements in the 70s and late 70s for women. And it feels like things are happening fast, like Title 8, Title 9, Pregnancy Discrimination Act. Lawsuits are being won, laws are being changed. And this I didn't know. The term sexual harassment was coined in 1975. That's the first time that there is a official term for what is happening. And the first time a suit was upheld in federal court was in 1977, a sexual harassment suit. So I think that is sort of an important factor to both the movie and the television show and women moving into these workplace comedies in television. Because also in 1979, the Equal Rights Amendment stalls out, which looked like it was about to pass, get ratified, become the law of the land, part of our Constitution, that rights shall be equal regardless of sex. It fails to get the last 3 states. It needs to be ratified. And the Equal Rights Amendment has never become law, even though it currently now has all the ratification it needs to be law. So just FYI, let's pen that for a minute for today and 1979. Jimmy Carter loses the election in 1980. Ronald Reagan wins. And in December of 1980, just before 1981, when the Reagan administration would move in and begin dismantling labor relations, affirmative action, unions, and all sorts of pushback against this forward momentum, a little movie comes out, December 19th, 1980, 9 to 5, starring Jane Fonda, Lily Tomlin, Dolly Parton, and Dabney Coleman, written by Patricia Resnick and Colin Higgins, and directed by Colin Higgins. It is produced by Bruce Gilbert, with Jane Fonda for Jane Fonda's company, IPC Films. The movie grosses over $100 million, making it the second highest rated film of the entire year, just behind The Empire Strikes Back.
Whatever happened to the guy that directed that movie? Did he ever do anything else? Just a flash in the pan, right? That's still a wild piece of information, though.
Yeah.
That's still a wild data point for a movie like 9 to 5. Like, up against a movie like Empire Strikes Back. Just the cultural relevance of both movies, I think one is more culturally relevant than ever now, and it ain't the one with the lightsabers.
So who wants to synopsize the movie 9 to 5 for us for a second?
I'll take it on. Jane Fonda plays a divorced former housewife named Judy Burnley. She's just starting her first job as she's just recently divorced. And she meets Violet Newstead, played by Lily Tomlin, who is that person in the office that knows how to get everything done that everybody else relies on. Violet is divorced as well, I believe.
And has kids.
Yeah, with kids, although Judy, Jane Fonda's character, does not. Dolly Parton plays Dora Lee, who is kind of a character based on herself. She's happily married. She's clearly a girl from the South, although they don't say exactly, do they say what city? But she's clearly the big city. So
good old country girl.
Yeah, exactly. And works for the big boss. She's the boss's secretary, and everybody in the office, all the other women in the office, are not particularly fond of her because they think she's sleeping with the boss because he's told everyone that they're sleeping together. What a guy. So we learn all of this kind of through Judy's eyes as Violet is taking around the office and explaining how things work and who's who and how things are done. Dabney Coleman plays this stereotypical but just wildly sexist, egotistical man who allows Violet to do a lot of his work for him without giving her any of the credit. Although he keeps promising her that it's coming, the promotion she deserves, but she's still waiting. And I'm so sorry, my brain is losing its way.
Violet accidentally thinks she's poisoned Hart.
As a result of that, these three women get close.
They bond.
Because they're bond. They're all involved in trying to help Violet out of this situation where actually a lot of hilarity ensues.
He sort of figures out that they tried to kill him.
Yes. Or he's going to think that they tried to kill him.
Yes. And ultimately, he basically is going to make Dorley sleep with him, or he's going to tell on them and get them in trouble. And so they kidnap him.
Well, it all sort of happens accidentally.
It sort of happens accidentally.
She's in the office yelling at him, and he's trying to escape, and she manages to tie him to a chair using a long phone cord. And again, hilarity ensues.
But what is crazy is they keep him for like 4 to 6 weeks while they're waiting on some information about how he
was stealing from the
company. And they run the company without him, and nobody notices. And in fact, they improve things at the company, and they make the workplace happier and healthier, and implement flex hours, and have childcare, and increase productivity, and everything's working great. And then he escapes. So it's a very funny comedy. We talked about it on the Kulturecast, like deeper. But Jane Fonda's idea, because she produced this out of her company. She wanted to make this. She knew the people who ran that movement. She said, I want to make a movie out of this movement, but it can't be preachy. But it is important to show that you can run an office without the boss, but you can't run an office without the secretaries.
Mm-hmm. And that you can run an office in a humane way that's to the benefit of the employees and in ways that help improve not just their lives, but their productivity. They become more productive workers. They want to work harder because they don't have to worry about childcare, or they can work flex time so they can take care of their families, and that, you know, all the things that go into making your work life better, that Hart was, and really just about every company out there was not really seeing even today the benefit of.
Yes. And then she wanted to make a movie with 3 women. So movie's a big hit. And then they decide to produce a TV show. And it's the first TV show that Jane Fonda's company produces, as far as I know, from the research. It's hard. But Chris, you're absolutely right. It's hard to find out about this show.
It's hard to find this show.
It's hard to find this show.
I'm sure y'all will provide it to y'all's audience, but there's like a handful of episodes on YouTube, and that's it. Like it is not readily available, and I wonder why. Actually, I think we probably all know where it's sitting. It's sitting in Disney's vaults now with the rest of everything that was produced by and owned by 20th Century Fox, because it was a 20th Century Fox property, and it's now owned by our friends at Disney. And this has come up on my show a couple times, but Disney, I don't think, is interested in making something like this readily available as much as, you know, producing and creating Marvel and Star Wars and content that more or less is guaranteed to make them money. So this is not high on the list any more than Harry and Tonto being re-released, or The Other being re-released, or so many other fantastic films and TV movies that Disney is kind of just sitting on. Not saying that this is great. I'm saying that this just is worth being re-released. It's almost hard to judge the quality of this show. How do you judge the quality on a show that's like impossible to find and you can see like a handful of episodes? Like, it's terrible. How could you, unless you're asking someone who watched all 85 episodes, which is almost an impossibility at this point, like to say it's good or bad is almost unimportant.
Yes.
Is it clear, though, that Disney owns it? I mean, the laws back then about ownership of television shows was very different.
Sure.
Networks couldn't own them. I don't know if Jane Fonda's company owns it.
I mean, 20th Century Fox distributed it. So, I mean, it's a big assumption, sure. But let me put it this way. Disney owns 20th Century Fox's stuff now. So maybe not. But I don't think it's getting re-released either way is probably the bigger problem.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of challenges. One, nobody archived that stuff the way that you needed to archive it. They archive stuff on film, but I believe, and I could be wrong, that this may not have been shot on film. The first season may have been. All right, so let's talk about the episodes we were able to find. Sharon, do you want to run us down the TV show, just the stats?
Sure. So the 9 to 5 TV show ran 5 seasons with, as Chris mentioned, 85 episodes. It ran between 1982 and 1988. Season 1 starred Rita Moreno as Violet, Rachel Dennison, Dolly Parton's sister, as Dora Lee, and Valerie Curtin as Judy. Jean Marsh played the office kind of busybody and sort of heart spy on the secretarial floor, telling him what everybody was up to. Yes, Roz. And Jeffrey Tambor played Franklin Hart, the role that Dabney Coleman played in the movie. So that was the cast of the first season. It was created by Michael S. Bayer and Kim Weiskopf, executive produced by Jane Fonda and Bruce Gilbert.
And so this season is 4 episodes. There are 4 episodes in the first season, which makes me think, and this is just me, now that we know a few things about 80s television, is they got a 6-episode order, because that's what you typically got, but 2 of them they didn't air. And I think part of it is, and we were only able to find part of 1 episode, right? That's what I found.
I found an entire episode from that first season with Jeffrey Tambor in the lead role, I think.
Okay. I found some of season 1, episode 3, The China Syndrome, which is a little play on Jane Fonda's movie, The China Syndrome. Completely different.
I chuckled at that title. I chuckled at the title. I wasn't able to find anything from the first season in its entirety. The second season had that whole episode. Yes. I was hoping to see some Jeffrey Tambor.
I was hoping to see more of him too.
Yeah.
I found that episode kind of rocky. Maybe that's why it felt like it hadn't really found its tone for a TV series as opposed to the movie, because obviously they're not going to go through the same beats.
Right. They're not going to kidnap the boss because that's a movie story.
Exactly. But it just felt like it was still kind of finding its way a little bit and hadn't really. And perhaps as evidenced by the fact that Jeffrey Tambor was replaced by Peter Bonerz, they weren't quite sure they had found it either. And that may have been part of their attempt to try to change it into something that was more television ready.
Well, and this has a ton of cast changeover from first season to second season. And then it looks like it's canceled. And then first run syndication picks it up. So there's a big break. It runs from 82 to 83.
Right.
And then it comes back in first run syndication 86 to 88, which is a huge gap. Yeah. Right.
Who was waiting that long? It's like 4 years. Like somebody sitting like wrapping their fingers on the table, like 9 to 5. The TV shows better be coming back. Like,
no, I think
nobody acts that way now about TV. Like if things are gone for a year, people forget. Like when Game of Thrones was like, we'll be back in 18 months. It's like so long for 15 months. Like not going to remember anything. Like it's insanity to me. It's just like the show has gone for 4 years and it still comes back somehow.
But it wasn't gone because what you had then that you don't have now is syndication.
Right.
And that there were only a few channels and there wasn't enough content. And so they just reran episodes. So they're rerunning episodes of a show called 9 to 5, which if you didn't catch it at the time that it aired, you could catch it again and again and again and again.
Until you're sick of that theme song. I'm sick of hearing it. I don't want to hear Dolly anymore. 9 to 5 from 5 until midnight every day on CW.
I was also surprised that the song opens the show, but not Dolly Parton singing it. So in season 1, she doesn't sing it.
Later,
season 2, it's her singing it. It's pretty much the song from the movie.
Right.
And then in season 3, it is. Season 4 and 5, it's just an instrumental, I think.
That was on a very serious episode on 9 to 5. Like they take the Dolly Parton music out. I'm joking, but like that could be why. I did want to mention first episode of the show is directed by someone who pretty good hands to be in, Noam Pitlick, who cut his teeth on Barney Miller, won an Emmy because of Barney Miller. That's what I was really hoping, like, to find, like, he actually directed the first 2 episodes. So, like, the show starts off on the right foot and they're putting their best foot forward. Jane Fonda is involved until the 3rd season of the show.
Right. And the look of that first season, from the snippets we saw, it looks really good.
Yeah.
It looks unusual. I'm sure it's shot on film, actually. That season was shot on film. I think by season 3, they may be shooting on video because the look of the show is different, and some might call it worse and terrible.
And they probably didn't have the same budget that they had when it was on networks.
Some might say. I have heard. I mean, the show doesn't. I think I saw clips from all over the run of the show, and it seemed like the longer the show went on, the cheaper it looked.
That was 80s television. If you made it to season 3, they just apparently cut your budget and you just kept running.
You guys can do it. You're fine,
it's fine
now. You know what you're doing already.
But episode 3 was directed by Nell Cox, who is a female director from the 70s and 80s and directed a bit of stuff. And so that I thought was really important. And the episode 3 was written by Deborah Frank and Scott Rubinstein. There were women in the writer and director positions on this show very early on. I definitely think that was Jane Fonda and the mission of the show, I'm going to say, because the mission of the show was to promote women and to have women in these roles and to say that women could be in these spaces. And Jane Fonda, I think, spent a lot of time putting her money where her mouth was.
What do y'all think about I mean, again, like, obviously, like you just mentioned, Susan, like the show is less static than most TV shows tend to be. What did y'all think about the recast of the main 3? At least the main versions of the recast, like Rita Moreno, Rachel Dennison, and Valerie Curtin. I guess those are the 3 big ones, right?
Of the little that we can see, Rita Moreno is amazing. I think she's great. She's funny. She's smart. You totally buy her as running this office or able to run this office. I really liked her.
I agree. I thought she was great, too. Valerie Curtin played Judy a little more neurotic, for lack of a better word.
It was less naive and more neurotic.
Yeah.
And more anxious.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. Rachel Dennison in the first season was clearly showing that she was not an experienced actress. She got better. By the time I saw the episodes from the last season, I thought she got much better. Yeah. But in the first season, it was,
Again, she's charming.
Yes.
She's sweet.
Fine, but
she's playing the character. It's just, if you've just come off that movie, Dolly Parton is a huge surprise in the movie. I mean, she is so good in that movie.
Yeah, and it's clear that Rachel Dennison is in the TV show because she's Dolly Parton's sister.
And she sort of looks like
fine. Yeah.
Doralee. Yeah. She's the one that they cast to be the most like the character in the movie, clearly. And I liked that they kind of shifted a little bit for the other characters. Valerie Curtin is sort of doing her own thing. She's not quite playing Jane Fonda. And Rita Moreno is not trying to do Lily Tomlin. Mm-hmm. She's doing Rita Moreno. But I appreciate that. What did you think?
I thought Valerie Curtin was interesting. I kind of didn't realize she was playing the Jane Fonda character until they said the name, because it's not different, but it is different. I don't know how to explain it. Like, it's different, but not in a way that's unwelcome.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want someone to just go and do the Jane Fonda thing, because that's more or less what Rachel Dennison is doing, which is just the Dolly Parton thing, which that's what you need in this show. You need to recapture that chemistry somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they do by having Rachel Dennison as kind of I'm not saying anchor as in she drags everybody down. I'm saying anchor as in she's the one who's there the entire time. She is there for the entire run of the show. And I think by having her there, there's at least a point of reference for the characters to interact with that feels consistent with what the movie was trying to get across. I think, to your point, Sharon, the longer the show went on and the more I saw of it, the better Rachel Dennison got. It's frankly kind of surprising this was more or less it. Like, she did this and nothing else. And by the kind of the later episodes that I saw, she was fine. Like, for a network television show doing kind of the Dolly Parton adjacent thing. And she was perfectly fine.
And she does get better. And she's the only cast member that stays all the way through, I think.
Yeah, she's there. No, that's what I'm saying. Like, because she's there the whole time, you get to see her interact with Sally Struthers. You get to see her interact with Leah Ayres in that third season, which there's even like the third season feels like the one that's really hard to find.
The third season's hard to find. And the third season is the only one without Valerie Curtin. They kick Valerie Curtin to the curb and bring in Leah Ayres.
Yeah.
To sort of not replace her as that character. She's playing a different character from what I read, because again, it's hard to find.
Right.
And Peter Bonerz is there for season 2 and 3 playing Hart. But then season 4 and 5, they bring in Sally Struthers.
Right.
Rita Moreno's gone.
And Edward Winter as well.
Yes. Who plays kind of a more likable Hart kind of character.
Right.
Yeah. He's not as awful.
Yeah. And here's my biggest problem with past season 2, from what we can tell. Season 1 and 2, the boss is the antagonist, based on what I can read about the synopsis of the show. He's being an egotistical, sexist jerk. He's not as bad as Dabney Coleman because it's a sitcom and you have to like him, sort of. But by the later seasons, it is not the movie.
No,
it's not the characters
all.
from the movie.
No.
The situation itself has shifted, and it's basically this harried male boss trying to deal with all these crazy women. That's literally what it felt like in some of those episodes.
To me, it became more of a standard office sitcom. I still thought the women were the focus, and their trials and tribulations with these crazy bosses that they have to work with. You've got the idiot who's an executive because God knows why. There's actually a female executive. I never did quite figure out what she was doing, but
it's hard to track some of.
Yeah. And then you've got everybody's boss played by Edgar Winter, who's Dora Lee is his secretary. And again, he's
the kinder boss. He's the boss that comes in at the big boss that comes in at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh.
He's still but he's more competent and he's less icky than Hart was. But it's about the workplace. And I still think it's more about how the women have to put up with all of this as opposed to the opposite of the men, sort of, because it's clear that they're still not getting the respect they deserve, especially when you look at this idiot executive who does God knows what. But it's still about them and what they have to put up with, those 3 women.
There was one of the later episodes that felt very off because it felt like it was more about the boss than it was about the women.
Is that the Fred Applegate episode where they introduce another boss
yes,
character?
There's like 3 bosses or something.
Yeah, there's like a short little fat boss.
Yes.
And there's the tall, not as abrasive boss. And then there's like one other guy. It's like, geez, Louise. Oh, well, they each needed an antagonistic person to play off of is probably what they thought by the end. It's like, Jesus, 6 main actors as your like leads. Just it don't need those combinations. It's too much.
3 of them are men. Like their ratio shifts dramatically from the first season where it's clearly the women are centered, the women are top of the call sheet, and it's way more women than men in those scenes, in those stories. And then by the end, the opening sequence is literally, here's some 3 women. Oh, and here's some guys, and here's more guys, and here's another guy. Like you're like...
But if you're working in an office at that time, that was the reality. To me, it still felt like the women were telling the story through them.
It was still their story. Okay.
Yeah. Telling the story through them about all these executives, some of them who were brighter than others, that they had to deal with to try to keep their jobs or to try to get jobs. Or having watched part of or all of, I think I thought it was a full episode. Maybe it wasn't. The one that we watched from the first season. It seemed like they maybe couldn't quite figure out a way to stay with what the movie was into a television show. And so what they seem to have done finally going to syndication perhaps is expand the universe a little bit. Because how do you sustain, this Hart guy, he's so awful. How do you keep that?
How do you stay in that job
for
years?
That's what I was going to say. It's like, how is that a show for more than a season, maybe.
I think that's always a challenge of turning a movie into a television show, which happened, as you said, a lot in the 80s. I think the most successful, I would say, from that era, which from the 70s and 80s, would be MASH.
Of course.
Like MASH is the gold standard.
Is there an example that is TV to movie that worked, though?
That is a good question.
That's like a more recent thing. I can think of the X-Files in the 90s, but like I'm saying, like I don't know if that was happening in the 80s. The other direction clearly was happening this way.
21 Jump Street.
Okay.
The Addams Family.
Okay.
The A-Team.
Okay.
The Hulk.
Yes.
But it was a cartoon.
The Hulk.
It was a comic before it was a TV show.
It was a comic, then a TV show, and then
it has an even longer tail.
Wonder Woman is now a movie.
Wonder Woman.
Oh, I was talking just in the 80s. I mean, if we're talking like now, like but I was more like in the 80s. Like, were there things in the 80s where it was like a show that became a movie?
I'm going to guess because, I mean, even then there was this bifurcation between television and movies that doesn't really exist in the same way today. It was really hard for TV actors to make the leap over to movies, and you didn't get a lot of contemporary movie actors doing television. They tended to be, more seasoned actors who are doing guest roles or whatever. Things have changed a lot in that regard. And there was, and I think there still is, kind of a sense that getting people to go to a movie theater and pay to see something that they've been watching on television for free is difficult. It's not something that normally happens. I don't know that many of them were very successful.
The Muppet Show. The Muppet Show was a television show and almost same time frame had successful theatrical films. And then there's a lot of TV movies that are done after these shows. But there was something that was surprising.
We did the Star Treks, but was that 80s?
No, Star Trek was 60s, and then the movies were started in the 80s.
Twilight Zone, 60s and 80s. Also.
There's the huge gap between sort of 70s and 80s shows that are now remade, quite differently. Police Squad to, Naked Gun.
The Fugitive.
The Fugitive. Yeah.
Like that's in the 90s. Like it's just like, it wasn't, I feel like the other direction, there's that little bit of lag time because it needs to maybe like build up kind of that head of steam to get back to that point. I mean, something like even Community now is getting a movie, and it's a contemporary show that's taken, I don't even know if it's been a decade since that show wasn't on, but it's been a while. So I feel like it happens the other direction faster, especially in the 80s.
In the 80s,
I mean, there were plenty of 80s cartoons based off of movies. I mean, it seemed like every movie that came out that could be halfway marketed to kids was turned into cartoon. Ghostbusters. I mean, not Star Wars, but most things were existing to sell toys, and if they could sell a toy by making a movie into a cartoon, they would. So as someone who grew up watching Godzilla and Men in Black, the cartoon, it's like those things did not need to exist. And even though I enjoyed them, they didn't need to exist.
Yeah, so there was a lot more movies spawning television shows than television shows spawning movies. Although now, if you include, the Starsky and Hutches and 21 Jump Streets and things like that, there's a lot more of 70s and 80s and 90s television launching pretty big movies now, right?
Yeah. Like you said, 21 Jump Street got a sequel even.
Charlie's Angels.
Yeah. The A-Team, these are shows that as we sort of reuse IP and their names, they're familiar names. 9 to 5 was created into a TV show because the movie and the song were so successful. And the song, we're not even talking about, they put that song in that show. You could sell it to syndication based on the song alone because the song was a number one song. It was Dolly Parton's, one of her biggest of the decade, maybe one of her biggest of all time. Right. And won 2 Grammys.
And an Oscar nomination, at least, I believe. I mean, it's a big deal.
It was a big deal.
It was a big deal. It was, 9 to 5, the name, right? Like, that's why it was turned into a musical.
In 2009, because everything old is new again. Right. And I have to say, the musical is easier to find on streaming than the television show, and it shouldn't be. I mean, however, I did enjoy checking it out. But what I do like is it's the same writer that adapted it to a musical. It's Patricia Resnick adapted the book, and Dolly Parton does the music. So it's really quite great. They, of course, have the 9 to 5 song. So that's just right there. You know, you got your great opening number. And they fixed some story problems I had with the movie in the second act and in the final scenes. I've always felt it was a little bit like, you know, Deus Ex Machina and a little too like, oh, and then the big boss comes in and kind of solves everything.
I wish we had been able to watch more of the show to see how they kind of wrangle the end of the movie into the beginning of the show, because they must have done some interesting gymnastics to get from the end of the movie where they essentially say, well, he goes away and they go and to the future eventually do something else. But the show picks up again, like, since we're not able to see it, like, I would love to have seen the gymnastics they go through to see if they undo the ending of the movie, if they change it in a substantive way, because the movie's ending is pretty like cut and dried. Like, this is what happened.
If I had to guess, they just ignore the whole second and third act and it's just start at the beginning of the movie with all what the dynamics are and right from there.
Right. Just tell the movie as a show. Like, Don't even bother. Yeah, that would be the way I would have done it. Like, they're not mutually exclusive. It doesn't need to be. Like, I don't know. Like, you can draw from it, but like, it would be weird to be like, oh, the ending didn't matter. Never mind. Like, I don't know. Again, Jane Fonda was involved either way. So I feel like she would have had some say in it at least.
I think because the first episode we were able to find pieces of was episode 3. And it was sort of like the alternate dimension. We start in the same place as the movie, and then we just go in this way, and we don't end up kidnapping him yet.
We'll save that for season 3.
Yeah. That's my guess. And I'm looking. Here it is. So the first episode, Violet and Judy suspect a new secretary has been hired for her physical attributes. So Judy is the arrival, our unknown into the movie.
Yeah, our eyes into
the movie. Yeah. When Judy, Jane Fonda's character in the movie, shows up to get a job for the first time because she's been married and now she's divorced and now she has to take care of herself. And she doesn't have kids. Violet has kids. But in this case, the new girl in town is Rachel Dennison, is the Dolly Parton character, right?
Which makes sense why she's with the show the entire run. She's the main character of the show.
There you go.
She's the main character of the show. But I don't get that. I get that Violet is the main character of the show from the episodes we saw.
Yeah.
But that's just me.
I agree with you 100%.
Anyway, but clearly she's hired by Hart to be the new secretary, and that flips the world up. And that's a great place to start.
So it's like a prequel.
It's a little bit of a prequel. Yeah. Except that Judy's already there. It's a little bit of a reimagine. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a reimagining the world. But the world is very clear. I did love the look of the opening sequence because it looked like the movie. And I love the look of the show for that season. And I liked in the second season episode that I was able to find, The Oldest Profession, season 2, episode 15, directed by Peter Baldwin, written by Freddie Tobin, which I went to look up, has a number of credits around the 80s. And I think, but it's hard to track any more information, except that there is a playwright, Freddie Tobin, and I believe it's a woman. It's Freddie with Fredi is how it's spelled. And I'm making a long swing at that Freddie Tobin is a female writer who was a playwright and then became a sitcom writer. But in the episode, the secretaries, and I love that that's how you tell these stories. That's how they're told in these synopsises. The secretaries do this and the secretaries do that, because secretary is such a loaded word. It's like housewife, right? It's such a 70s, 80s, 90s word. So, the assistants, the coordinators, but the ladies need more money. So they take on a second job as doing singing telegrams. And singing telegrams are such an 80s thing. It's really funny that was a story. You got to understand, just to speak of our friend Richard Hatem, he and his friend Larry did a Two Stooges singing telegram in the 80s. When he was in high school, he and Larry used to go and be, Moe and Curly, and whoever they were doing the singing telegram for, they would basically incorporate as their third stooge. And they would be the Three Stooges. They weren't singing, they were doing a little bit, but it was to deliver this, telegram of happy birthday or, happy anniversary, because that's what you would do, is send the Two Stooges to wish someone a happy anniversary.
People talk about what they would do if they invented a time machine. I know where I'm going, and I know what I want to see. I know Richard doing the Two Stooges bit would be pretty great.
Let me ask you this. Has he told the story of using that to get in a room?
I think so, yeah.
Has he told the story of, I don't want to tell it because I can't speak about it. It's if he hasn't told it, it's his to tell. Anyway,
He was on a radio show. I heard it.
You heard it.
I heard the story.
He has given the story of
when he
Stephen
was on
Cannell.
a live radio show. Yeah.
Okay. So when
years ago.
Yes.
I actually heard it on the radio. Yeah.
You heard it on the radio. There you go. So yes, so he's already told the story of when he basically sent himself to Stephen Cannell in order to use the singing telegram bit to then basically go on Stephen Cannell's birthday to basically go, oh, and I have a script. And he was in high school.
That's that. You know what? Yeah, I believe it. Yep.
And then years later, he was hired by Stephen Cannell to write one of the first adaptations of the A-Team into a movie. He got hired and paid. He worked with Stephen Cannell and Stephen Cannell's team, and he never mentioned that story.
Wow. That's the best part of the story right there. Because, man, what is that conversation like? I just wanted to let you know at one point, someone who looked like me may have come to your office.
He looked very different
I'm
from
sure
when he was in high
that's
school.
the benefit, probably. He's like, he doesn't even recognize me.
Anyway.
This is something that showed up in the 70s, though, because they used it in Barney Miller. And it's like, that's not a thing. It's so not a thing anymore.
No,
people
it would
have
be
ring
terrifying.
doorbells to avoid having to open the door to people. No one's going to be like, there's a person I don't know at my front door dressed up like a shark. Let me open my door and see what they want. Like, that's not happening. It's not happening in 2023. I'm not even going to interact with them through my Ring doorbell, let alone go and stand on my front porch and interact with them. Or like you said, Sharon, invite them in my home. Like, no, thank you. I'm good.
A, we don't have the same office culture, but B, even when we did, you couldn't get into those offices now, even basically after 9/11 or even before that.
Yeah.
There was no way to get into spaces like that and do that kind of thing.
Interesting anachronism, really.
Yes. But when they're doing this, basically a vice cop thinks, because they're all dressed up in these weird, wacky costumes, and he thinks they're prostitutes and arrests them. And then they end up spending the night in jail with the nanny.
Fran Drescher
playing the actual woman sex worker in the scene. And again, for me, that was a great episode because that was very much in a very funny, interesting way, talking about the roles for women, talking about challenges for women. They have to take a second job because they need more money and they're overworked and then they're mistaken for sex workers. And then they're in jail and they're not believed. But then there's an interchange with an actual sex worker who is sort of going, hey, this is back off. They, because Rita Moreno gets all judgy, Violet gets all judgy about it. And I just thought that was really great. I thought that was a really great episode. I thought everybody was funny. I thought Valerie Curtin was hilarious because she starts like, this is a great story. And she starts using the paper towels to write the story of their drama. I was like, I want more of that show. And that's season 2.
And it was nice to see a very young Fran Drescher too.
Oh my God. She was adorable. I liked her.
It's like you could pick her out immediately because it's not an immediate close shot on her, but it's like pretty far back. And again, on YouTube, pretty grainy. But the moment you see her, it's like, it's Fran Drescher. And she still sounds like Fran Drescher, but she's not doing the Fran Drescher thing that everybody expects now. But it's still a little bit there, but she's great. This show clearly had some legs. And the minor amount that we could find, I think it's pretty entertaining, pretty stock and trade what they were doing at the time. It was not like the stories they were telling were pretty interesting. And I think it was more important that it's 3 female leads as the ones taking this show where it needs to go, not relying on a male anything really. I mean, again, the male antagonist, at least as we're led to believe the first 2, maybe 3 seasons, clearly they kind of just went overboard the later the show went. But I like the stories that they're telling are so focused on the 3 leads. And I think that's really smart.
Yeah. And I like Sally Struthers too. I don't dislike her. I just think after Rita Moreno, it was just and it's a different character. Like it just feels different. Everything feels different. So it's clearly a revamp. It's clearly several years later. Jane Fonda and her producer leave basically after season 2 because of creative differences with the studio network. An interesting factoid of when this premiered. It launched the same time as Cagney and Lacey on CBS, this on ABC. And I just thought that was really interesting. And I wonder who jumped against each other first.
Well, and it says, I was reading, it says that there was an actor who was in Cagney and Lacey and was on this show as well.
And playing the kid.
Right, playing Violet's son in this show.
So playing Violet's son in this show and playing Lacey's son in Cagney and Lacey.
Sort of like Beverly Garland playing
I know.
mothers in two different shows.
Shows.
Not the same time, but close enough. And this kid's playing everybody's son across the networks, I guess.
Oh, my gosh. All right. Well, we haven't taken a break. I'm just going to say we have to take a break, and then we'll come back from a break.
And we're back.
Great to be back. All right. So sort of wrap up on 9 to 5 TV show, Chris.
I will tell you that I think a few things came out of the TV show and the movie, obviously. The pairing of the 3 personality types of the actresses in the movie very clearly influenced the TV show's kind of expectations for the actresses that they wanted to play the 3 leads. And then what's interesting is 80 for Brady comes out this year, and you have Rita Moreno and Lily Tomlin finally working together.
Because Rita Moreno was in the TV show. Jane Fonda produced this TV show. So they're working together on the show. They're not in the same scenes, right?
Right.
But it is very much the 80 for Brady because it involves 3 people involved in either the movie or the television show 9 to 5, which is kind of funny.
I don't think the movie 80 for Brady and even Grace and Frankie don't exist without 9 to 5 and them figuring out what that chemistry is between the 3 of them. And kind of that pairing, I think. I mean, again, Dolly Parton shows up in the last season of Grace and Frankie for a reason.
Yeah.
Because of 9 to 5. Like, this movie has some really long kind of pop culture ties that, I mean, 80 for Brady came out like early 2023.
The effect of the 9 to 5 movie clearly is resonating into today, literally. But it's so interesting. And I want to give Jane Fonda some props, man. She produced these really amazing movies in the 70s and 80s. China Syndrome, Electric Horseman, 9 to 5. And 9 to 5, everything you read about that it was her. It was her saying, I want to make a movie out of a movement. I have these friends that are doing this thing, and I want to make it about these women. And she was the one that was like, oh, I want to put Lily Tomlin in this. I want to work with Lily Tomlin. Oh my God, I'm listening to Dolly Parton sing one of her songs. There's a story where she's like, I was hearing Dolly Parton sing. I was like, oh, Dolly Parton would be great as Dora Lee. And she sort of built that movie with Colin Higgins. But really, I got to give her props for that. And then she was like, I'm going to do television. And feature film people didn't do television, as we said, right? But she's like, I'm going to go try this out. I don't know that she did any other television because I don't think the experience was as welcoming. Maybe we can get her on the show one day and ask her. But what was interesting to me is there's a book about the 9 to 5 working movement. And this is what they had to say about the movie, which I thought was really interesting. The most important effect of the movie was a change in public consciousness. Before the film came out, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, we had to argue about whether there was even discrimination in the workplace. We had to present proof. We had to convince people, including women, that they were being treated unfairly. After the movie came out, the argument was over. Yes, the movie was silly, but the silliness worked. By making millions of people laugh at this boss's bad behavior, the film ended the debate. We were no longer arguing that it was happening. We now were arguing the question of what should be done about it. And if you're making a movie that's a huge, awesome hit, and is also changing the conversation about how people are treated in the workplace, I don't know which one is better for your legacy.
I mean, I think for me, I'm just glad that something like this exists and is still relevant. And it's, I mean, again, the musical is not like it came out in the 90s, came out a couple years ago type thing. Like that for me is the big takeaway, is that like the success of this movie allowed a lot more successes down the road. And that's never a bad thing, especially like you just mentioned, Susan, the ones that are a little bit hard to maybe do intentionally, but at least they did happen.
Yeah, and I think this opened the door of like everything, like Hidden Figures. You think, oh, this is it. This is the last door. Yes, of course, Black women can lead a movie and make it a huge, huge hit. And there'll be all sorts of them now, right?
You're funny, Susan.
I know. But we just keep knocking on the door. All right. Woo. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking with us about 9 to 5 television show. Hopefully, we'll be able to find it streaming somewhere someday. I'm hopeful that as we continue down the streaming road, that they will get to some 70s, 80s, and 90s shows that are a little lost right now and don't seem to have a home, because I think they're important to have archived somewhere.
There are plenty of boutique labels out there that could pick this up. I'm sure somebody's got the original somewhere that they could just remaster.
The song might be hard. The song, music is also hard. If you didn't clear it for everything, you have to go back and clear it. And that is very difficult. But if anybody could pull it off, it might be someone like Jane Fonda, Dolly Parton, and Rita Moreno.
There you
going,
go.
Yeah, we want this to happen. And then, I don't know, Disney might say yes, or Paramount Plus should pick it up, figure out how to have it.
9 to 5, the TV show streaming, but with a different intro song. Wouldn't that be something?
Well, I think that's what one of the little hidden videos that we found, I think they changed the title song in order for it not to be pulled. Because I think as soon as that song hits in, say, a YouTube video or something, it probably gets pulled pretty quickly.
They're working 8 to 6 in this version. It's just slightly different, and we cleared it.
We're working 8 to 6.
We're working 8 to 6. Different show.
I'm kind of a 10 to 6 gal myself.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
9 to 5 seems like a drag.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Chris.
Where
Good to
can
see
people
you.
find you?
You can find me over at weirdingwaymedia.com, where you can find this lovely show and so many other shows that so many other people are putting together every week, myself included, and the aforementioned Mike White and y'all. So that's where you can find this show and all the other shows of the Weirding Way Media Network.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good one, Chris. Take care.
Bye, Chris. Thank you.
For today's audiography, to learn more about the movement that started it all, visit 925.org.
That's the number 9, TO, the number 5.org. And you can read the book, Working 9 to 5, A Woman's Movement, a Labor Union, and the Iconic Movie by Ellen Cassidy.
You can watch 9 to 5, The Story of a Movement by Julie Reichert and Stephen Bogner on Netflix.
And just for fun, because she's fabulous, you can follow Rita Moreno on Twitter. That is, if Twitter is still a thing when we air this, because every week it feels like it's about to fall apart. The wheels are coming off, but I'm still there. Twitter.com/the Rita Moreno.
We've got a couple of listener shout outs. First, to Shari Like Starry. Thank you so much for becoming a Patreon supporter. It means so much to us. If you want to be as cool as Shari Like Starry, then join us at patreon.com/80s TV Ladies and become a Patreon supporter. If you do so, you get ad-free episodes and special behind-the-scenes video with Susan and I. And coolest of all, you can watch some of our guest interviews.
That's true. And Shari Like Star, you've been emailing us almost since the beginning. So thank you for being one of our OG supporters. And I also want to thank Lena for reaching out on email to us. First time listener. She remembers seeing Stephanie Zimbalist being interviewed, and she just got to us, and Remington Steele. And she was like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get to the show yet. I'm like, listen, you can join this show anytime. It's never too late. You can hop in the middle. You can hop in the beginning. We're happy to talk forever and always about 80s TV ladies. And I also want to shout out to our listeners on YouTube, to Larry, who did indeed remind me, and I'm going to be corrected because Archie did change over the course of the show. I said that he didn't over the course of All in the Family. One of the comments on our Say Gay, looking back at 70s, 80s, 90s gay representation in television with Matt Baum. He wrote a very thoughtful comment about how he did, and he gave an episode example to prove it.
We love your comments there, so please keep them coming. Anyone can subscribe at youtube.com/@80s TV Ladies.
We'll see you there.
Thank you for listening to 80s TV Ladies. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast platform. We're on all of them: Spotify, Google Podcasts, Good Pods, Search 80s TV Ladies and tell your friends.
And I want to shout out again to Chris Stachiw and Chris and Mike White at Weirding Way Media, where you can find this podcast and theirs, along with many other very cool podcasts on the Weirding Way Network. Hey, if you know or have a copy of the 9 to 5 TV show, let us know. We would love to actually watch all of the episodes and not just the 4.5 we got to scramble up on YouTube. So please send us a message if you have a secret 5 seasons of this show.
We hope 80s TV Ladies brings you joy and laughter and lots of fabulous new and old shows to watch, all of which will lead us forward toward being amazing ladies of the 21st century.
Working 9 to 5. What a way to make a living.
Barely getting by. It's all taken and no given.
I don't know the rest.
But it's super awesome anyway.
Something if you let it. 9 to 5.
That's perfect.